So, this is episode 7 of the Learn React workshop series, where we go through a different topic and kind of build a code example from each of the topics so that I can kind of talk about it while I'm going through it. Okay. So, tonight I'm going to be building 2 projects using CodeSandbox.io. And I want you to know that you can ask questions throughout. Just in case I might not look over and see the chat log on my other monitor, just do me a favor and hit the raise hand button, and that will let me know that you have a question. Now, if you see something that kind of blows your mind tonight, what I like to have is students clap, just if you learn something new, okay? And it lets me know I'm on the right path. So tonight our focus is on lists and forms. Okay, so in the first example, here I am in CodeSandbox. I'm going to create a new React sandbox. And I'm going to go ahead and save this one. And if you've never used, it looks like I might have. Let's actually go back here and fix this real quick. It looks like I've just created way too many. Yeah, let me delete a couple of these just in case. Let's see. Maybe I gotta open these and then go into File. Oh, gosh darn it, how do you delete one? Okay, well, here's what we'll do. We will sign out, and I'll just sign in with a new. Oh, you can only sign in with GitHub? No, don't tell me that. Well, I think we can still create a sandbox from like a guest account. So we'll create React, and then that's fine. Okay, so I can just create this, and then I will still be able to share the URL with you. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to build a form example. And so for this example, what I want to do here is build like just a login form and kind of go through what that looks like. So I'm going to have 2 different, I'm going to create a folder here called components. And I'm going to have 2 different files inside of this components. I'm going to have a login.js. And for right now, I'm just going to make this a quick little functional component. And then I'm going to have a dashboard component as well. All right. Okay, so now I've got these 2 different components. And I'm going to go ahead and import both of those. So I'm going to import login from components/login. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this and change this to dashboard in both places. Perfect. Okay. Now, if I rendered both of these right here, right now, it would work perfectly fine. But what I want to do is I want to basically do some conditional rendering here. I want to make sure that the login only shows if I don't have a user, and the dashboard shows if I do have a user logged in. Now, we're not going to really work with anything like local storage tonight. That's kind of down the line, but what we will do is just derive this from state. So I'm going to convert this from a functional component to a class. And so I'm going to say app extends react.component. Okay, and so that works fine, but I do need to wrap this in a render method, this return statement. Okay, and so now we've got a class-based component, which means I can come up in the constructor, which means I got to fire off super, and I can say this.state equals, and I'm just going to put an empty user object in there. Okay, and so what I will do is basically just have a conditional. So I'm actually, instead of defaulting to an empty object, I'm going to default it to null. And so that way it's empty, but it still evaluates as false. And so I'm just going to have a conditional here that says if this.state.user, right? So if that's true, show me render the dashboard component. But if it's false, render the login component, okay? And so now I've just conditionally decided between those 2 using a ternary operator. If you're not familiar, just think of it as a simplified 1-line if-else. If, all right, so this is our conditional, if this is true, else, right? And it's just automatically assuming that we want to return or render something. Okay. All right, so that means if I change the user from null to some sort of object, doesn't even have to have anything, you can see now the dashboard component renders instead of the login component. So we'll set that back to null. And that's because what I want for the login component is I want a form, okay? So we are going to go ahead and make this a class to begin with. So instead of a function, it'll be a class login extends react.component. I think I need to create a shortcut way of doing a class-based component. I have a shortcut way of doing a functional component. Well, you can learn that with me right now. Let's do that. So I'm going to select this, go over to Text Expander, create a new snippet, and paste that in, except I don't know what it's going to be called. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill this in with a single line field, and we're just going to call this component. And I'm going to copy and paste it in a couple different places. The default value will be child. We might come up with a better name later. And I also want to put that component here. So we're going to do, again, a fill in with a single line field. We'll name it the same thing. So that way, if we type it in one place, it'll also go here. And then here, same, here is the login component, fill in, single line field. And if you haven't played with, what is this called, Text Expander before, it's a very, very helpful tool. So what I'm going to call this, I'm going to call this React class component. And I called the other one React Func. I'll call this one React class, okay, as the abbreviation. So now let's say I was starting from scratch. I could say React class. It's going to pop up and prompt me, what do I want to call this? Login. And you can see that it changed it in all three places, hit enter, and now I've got a class-based component. Ready to go. So now whenever I need to create a class-based React component, I'm ready to go. Maybe down the line I'll also do something for constructor and super and this.state equals to make that a little easier as well. Okay, so I've got this login component, and what I want to have here is I want to have a form tag. And this form, I'm going to have 3 inputs, each on their own line, and rather than write a lot of CSS, I'm just going to put each one in a paragraph tag. So this one is going to be type email. The name is going to be email, and the placeholder is going to be email, and the ARIA label is going to be email. Something I learned about ARIA labels, they're actually the preferred accessibility labeling technique. #1 preferred. There's like 5 different options, and using an actual label tag is second to last, which is something I didn't know. I would have thought that would have been the top accessibility technique for labeling inputs. So that makes my life easier because now I don't have to hide labels with CSS. I can just use ARIA label. Now I'm going to have 2 more inputs, so I'm just going to copy and paste that a couple times. Now this one, instead of being type email, is going to be type password. The name, sure enough, is also going to be password. The ARIA label will be password, and the placeholder will be password with a capital P. And then this input will be type submit. The name will be submit. There is no placeholder, but we'll change it to value of login, and the ARIA label will be login button. Okay, perfect. So now I've got my form. And so if I try to submit this right now, right, it's kind of like auto reloading the page. It's not doing anything as far as if I try to type in something like that, it is auto detecting that this should be an email address. So that's good. It's not requiring anything. So of course I could use the HTML attributes like require to add a little bit of validation and things like that. But what I need is I need a submit event. So you'll notice that most of this in JSX is exactly the same as in HTML, right? I didn't have to really change anything here like I did with like class name. All of this looks fine. Now, if I want to go ahead and submit this, I'm going to create a submit method. Okay, and so we're just going to call this submit form, spell it correctly, submit form equals, and we know we're going to pass in at least the event. So we'll put that in our callback function. And why? Because you know we've got to do prevent default on forms. So let's just come up to this form and say on submit equals. We need to get that event callback, and we'll just say this dot submit form and pass in that event callback. And so as of right now, if I hit login, nothing happens, right? And so if I wanted to get at that email and password, right? So let email would be e.target, which is the form itself, .email.value, okay? And I will show you that with a simple alert, okay? And so now if I type something in like tj@thinkful.com, and I'm going to go ahead and just keep that on my clipboard, you'll see that there it is in the alert. And so this is the key part of working with React or forms in React, is that E that represents the event that triggered this, this submit form. That its target would be the form itself. But there, from within that form, there's actually an object of keys. And each of those keys refers to the name value of those inputs. So there's a key for email, there's a key for password, there's a key even for submit. And then if we want then we just have the HTML element, right? And we can do things like change CSS or trigger click events or what have you. But we want its value. So then we have to say dot value to get the value that was typed in, okay? So we can do the same thing with password, e.target.password.value, right? And now we could do whatever action we would want to do. Now, in the real world, this would probably go to some sort of API call, right? To verify that that email and password are correct, get back an auth token stored in local storage. But what we want to do is pass it up to our app so that we can fill in this user, right? And we'll basically just construct a phony object. So let's create a method in here called login user, and it's going to expect an email and a password. Okay? And so we will go ahead and just say this set state. User will be an object of email and password, just like that. Okay. So yes, we're storing the password. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but we're just doing it for the sake of illustration here. Now let's go ahead and pass this login user method. So login user equals this dot login user as a prop down to our login component. So now our login component can pass that email and password, this dot props dot login user email and password. Okay. So now that means if we put in an email and a password and hit login, there we go. We see the dashboard component. Let's open this up in a new window so we can kind of watch in the React DevTools as this happens. So I'll bring up the React DevTools here, and we'll take a look at app. So you can see that app has an empty state object. App has a user in state and it's set to null. But as soon as I go ahead and type in this email and password and hit login, now it's changed to an object, and if I open that object, I see an email and a password. It works beautifully, right? Well, of course, we should have the dashboard have some sort of like log out component, so let's at least build that. So we'll change this to an H2 that says dashboard, and we'll maybe specify what user dashboard it is, right? So to do that, let's go ahead and pass to dashboard in our index that information. So we'll just say like email equals this dot state dot user dot email, okay, like so. And so now in dashboard, I can say this, or it's not a this, right? Because it's a functional component. So let's make sure we pass our props in. Props dot email. And then we'll pluralize it. It's their dashboard. Right? So I'll go ahead and log in, test, and now it says tj@thinkful.com's dashboard. All right. But let's go ahead and put a paragraph tag in here with a button, an ARIA label on this that just says log out button. And we will write the same thing here in between the tag. So the idea is that if I log in And notice there's no verification here. It's not testing to see if that's a user. It's just accepting whatever. So here's my log out button. So let's go and create that here in our app. So we'll say log out equals, and there's not really going to be an event or anything passed in. And we'll just set state of user back to null. And that's it. That'll log them out, right? So back in dashboard, or sorry, first let's pass that to dashboard. Log out equals this dot log out. Okay. And so now in dashboard, we will just tie that to the on click. And we'll go in there and say props dot log out. Right? And that's pretty much it. We do have something to represent the event, even though we're not using it. We could change it to just an empty callback. That's fine as well. So let's log in and log out. And that's it. Now we're cycling back and forth between them. Okay. So we've got that working, but I want to talk more about this login form. And the idea that we are targeting the event.target, i.e. the form, to get that email and password value from those inputs. This is what's called a controlled input. It means that the input, an uncontrolled, I got it backwards, an uncontrolled input. This means that it's not controlled by anything stateful, right? If you type something and you refresh that page or something, or what have you, that it's not saved anywhere. It's not stateful. It's getting cleared out. And so it's relying on you actually triggering that submit event for that data to be saved. So now we're going to look at what's called a controlled input. So I'm going to just comment these out for right now. And we're going to change things up a little bit. What we're going to do is inside of state, we're going to add two properties. We're going to say email is an empty string and password is an empty string. Okay, and so we've got one for each of our inputs that we're expecting the user to input. And so what we'll do is we'll come down here to our values and say value equals this dot state dot email. So we're basically saying for the value of that input to be whatever is in state. Okay, same for password. Value equals this dot state dot password. Now you're not going to see any immediate effect here because they were empty strings, but if I wanted to default it to TJ at Thinkful, which would help me so I don't have to keep typing it in, you'll see that that's there. Whatever is in state is there. So of course I could change this, right? No, I can't. I can't change this because changing this would mean directly modifying state. And we know that's one of the #1 rules of React. It's one of the main tenets is that you cannot modify state directly. That's why set state exists to begin with. So what that means is that in order to modify this, we're going to have to put an onChange event directly onto the input. And then we'll go ahead and grab E because E is going to represent the event of the change. And so E.target will represent this input. And we're just going to say this.setState of email to E.target.value, right? So the value of this input, okay? And we'll go ahead and copy and paste the same thing down here on password. It's just instead of email, it'll be password, okay? And so now what does that mean? That means that I can come in here and now I can change my email, right? I can change my password. Now let's open this up in another tab again so you can see again what's really happening behind the scenes in our React DevTools. So we'll go in here to our login form and you can see in state we've got that default TJ at Thinkful. So if I change that to tstalka, you'll see it updating on the right there in DevTools, right? You can see it highlight in yellow. As I type in a password, you can see it update, okay? Now if I hit login right now, nothing's really happening. In fact, it's actually throwing some errors, and that's because of the fact that we don't have an email and password yet. But it's actually very easy because our email and password are just this.state.email and this.state.password, right? Because as we were typing, they were updating in state. So as soon as we decide to submit the form, we don't have to go back to the DOM to get those values, right? We can just pull it directly from state. So this is what's called a controlled input. And it's the idea that the data is flowing in both directions. The value is set by the state, the value of the input, and the input itself updates the state. And so there's kind of this split second of like, oh, I updated it, and state's like, okay, so re-render, right? And it's kind of re-rendering that input every time you type. Now, it happens too fast, you're not going to see it, but it looks more like you're just typing inside of the input. Okay, so now we should be able to use it just like as we have before and hit login, and there we go, right? Works exactly the same, it's just this is more of a controlled input. Now, let's see a more specific example. So I'm going to go ahead and share this URL. We'll see if this still works. Let me try it in incognito without me having an account. Yeah, still shareable. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to drop that into the slides for tonight, which will be shared at the end of the workshop, and you'll be able to grab it from there. So now let's open up a new tab and go to Code Sandbox. And I'm going to create a new sandbox here. And in this one, I want to focus on using lists. Okay. So I'm going to come into app, and we've got our little React class. Let's call this app. We just don't need to re-import React. Okay. So we've got our app component. Let's change this from a paragraph to an H1. Okay. And we're going to call this our to-do application. And so we're going to take a look at using lists as well as working with forms. And this is a more complex example. So we're going to create that constructor again, super, and we're going to say this.state equals, and then inside of here, we're going to create to-dos as an empty array. And that's what we're going to start with. To-do app. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to have a paragraph here just to test things out that says number of to-dos. And we'll just put in this.state to-dos.length since it's an array. So there we go. Number of to-dos is 0. Okay, so we'll have a UL here. And then what we're going to do is we want to map over. Now, these to-dos are just basically going to be, it could be an object, but to make our life simple, I mean, we're literally, let's make it an object, yeah. With a title of Teach, Learn, React class, and a completed of false. Okay. All right, so we've got one to do in there. Let's copy and paste this, and this one will be React class 6, and that one is completed, but React class 7 is not yet been completed. Perfect. Okay, so we've got 2 to-dos. Now let's go ahead and update this UL, which Code Sandbox decided was self-closing since it didn't have any content. And let's just do a mapping here. So we're just going to say this.state.todos.map, and we're going to take each to-do, and we're just going to return an li with to-do.title, just like that. Okay. Now, we might want to do something to indicate that this to-do has been completed. Let's do a little bit in the CSS here. So I'm going to say that all ULs have list style of none and padding of 0, and say that. Okay. And then we'll say any li with the we'll make our lives easier and say it's called completed true. Is going to have, I believe it's text decoration strike through. No, text decoration. Where are the options? I always forget this. Text decoration. This is why we have Google and W3 schools. Do overline, line through. That's what it is. Line through. Okay. So if it has the class completed true, it'll get a line through. And so what we'll do for each of these is we'll just say the class name is template variable that's completed hyphen, and then we'll just say to-do.completed. So it'll either be completed false or completed true. And you can see my CSS is taking effect there. Let's also do a color of like a light gray. Yeah, cool. So it kind of like strikes it out if it's been completed. All right, so we've got these list elements. And what I want to do is let's create a click event. When you click on these, it toggles the completed true or false. So let's create a method for that, and we'll just call that toggle complete. And it's going to have, let's think about what we need here. We need to know which to do. So we basically need to know the index of which one we clicked on. And so we will basically need to grab that individual element. So what we'll do is we'll make a copy of to-dos. We'll say let to-dos equal this.state.to-dos. And then we'll say to-dos square bracket index dot completed is equal to the opposite of to-do square bracket index dot completed. And so that'll basically just set it to the opposite. If it was false, it's now true. And then we'll say this dot set state to-dos is this variable. Well, we can just say to-dos like that since it will use the ES6 kind of matching the key to the variable. Okay, so we need to know that index. And luckily, with JavaScript, this isn't specific to React, but with JavaScript, when we're mapping over an array, we by default have to pass at least one argument to the callback. And that's what represents that individual item. But we can pass a second optional to represent the index, like where we are in the loop. Are we on item 0, 1, 2, etc.? And so we need to know that in our onClick event. So we will say onClick, all right? And we've got our event, the onClick event, but I also want to pass in the index, okay? And I'm just going to call this .toggle complete, and I'm going to pass in that index. It doesn't need to know about the event. That's perfectly fine. But I needed that index as the second parameter. So now if I click on these, it should toggle complete. Okay, let's see what's happening. So we've got index here, to do and index, and we are returning. It might be too much for me. Maybe I don't need to pass that there. Yeah, that's probably what it was. I was just in the wrong state of mind on that. And there we go, perfect, okay. So now we're toggling back and forth, which makes me think I should probably have all LIs have their cursor look like a pointer. So you know you can click on it. Marked off, marked on, perfect, okay. We're checking these on and off, right? All right, so we've got the read down, we've got the update down. What about deleting these elements? So let's do this. We're going to create, after the to-do, we're going to create a little span tag. And we're just going to have like an X there to delete it, okay? And so let's style that up a little bit just so that we can see what that looks like. So li span, it's going to be the color of red. It's going to be display inline block. Why do we do inline block? So that we can do margin. We'll put a little bit of margin to the left of it so it's spaced out away from it. And we're going to have the font size be something like 20 pixels maybe. Yeah, there we go, perfect. So it's easy to see. It's still going to have that cursor. And so if you click on it right now, it's still toggling, right? And that's something we're gonna have to talk about. But it clearly looks like a delete button, right? All right, so we need a new method called delete to do. And sure enough, it's also going to need the index because it needs to know which one it should delete. And so what we're going to say is let to-dos equal this.state.to-dos, but what we're going to do is we're going to splice it. And this will allow us to separate out a certain number, okay? And so we know where we need to start. We need to start at the index, and we need to delete only one element, okay? And that should, let's double check here, just make sure that that's what we want it to do, because this splice might return. Let's double check. W3 schools splice. Can you tell I love using W3 schools? Okay. So splice, if I said splice splice method, it changes the original array. Okay, so we can't do that. But what that means is we can just set it equal to to-dos inside of state. We can't modify state directly, and then we can just put to-dos in its place. So now that we've got that copy, we'll remove that index from the copy, and then what we'll do is this.set state, and we'll do it just like before, to-dos. Whoops, to-dos. Oh gosh, spelling, to-dos. Okay, perfect. So we made a copy, we deleted that individual element. And so now let's tie that to this on-click event of the span. So we've got the event, and then we say delete to do. And again, we're still within that map, so we can still reference index, but let's make sure we add this dot delete to do. So now if we click on the X, it should delete it, right? Well, notice we had to click twice, right? That's very interesting. And so basically what's happening here, oh, there we go. It deleted it that time. Let's make sure that this is still working. We can click on that. Perfect. Okay. So we're actually, it's interesting. It is actually taking, I guess it makes sense that it would continue to work. So let's say, for instance, that I didn't have set state like that. So now if I click on this delete, let's refresh here. If I click on, oh, it's still deleting, even though I took out set state. Let's save that and make sure this is, okay, there we go. Okay. So now if I click on it, oh, it's actually, all right, I don't have the issue I thought I was going to have. I thought I was going to have an issue. Okay, now that's not working either. All right, well, regardless, what potentially is happening here is a thing called stop propagation, which basically means that when I click on this, it would also try, it's getting a little confused because this has a click event and this has a click event, right? And technically this is inside of this. And sometimes the way to fix that is to pass event, and just like we do prevent default, there's another method called stop propagation, which would keep those events from bubbling up. Now it does look like that's not going to be the case here. I'm going to save and refresh. And it does look like I can toggle this on and off as I please. And then when I want to delete it, I can delete it and it'll delete perfectly fine. So that's great. Seems to work fine. Awesome. Okay, so now we have the ability to read, update, and delete, but we haven't created yet. And this is where our form is going to come in. So we're going to create a form at the top of this. And this form is just going to have one input, and that input is going to be of type text. And it's going to be name of new to do. It's going to have a an ARIA label of new to do. And that should be it for right now. Okay, and then we'll give it a placeholder. To do, new to do. Okay, awesome. So now we've got that, but we don't have any sort of like submit event on this form. We're not doing any sort of controlled input, so let's do that. New to do is going to be a default of an empty string. So let's set the value equal to this.state.new to do. The on change event, this.set state to do will be new to do will be e.target.value. Okay, so now it's controlled at least, so I can type in here and it will actually be updating state, but there's nothing to run when I hit submit. Now notice this doesn't have a submit button. I could add a submit button or I could hit enter. Both are going to trigger the submit event, but let me go ahead and add that in right now. Input type equals submit, name equals submit, value equals add, or maybe I'll just do a plus. And then ARIA label is add new to do button. Okay, cool. Now I didn't put these in paragraphs because I do want them side by side. So now the idea is I type something and I hit add and it should add it. So let's create the method for that. So add to do, and all this is going to get is that to do text, right? And so technically I could just have it get the event itself. So we'll do event prevent default, and then this dot set state, and this is where it's going to be a little interesting. We're going to set to-dos equal to an array, and then we're going to use the spread operator to spread out what's already in this dot state dot to-dos. And remember, the spread operator kind of, you lose the data type of what you're spreading. So like you're not putting an array inside of an array here, you're just copying the values from that array into here. And then we're going to add a new to do after that, where the title is e.target.value. dot, or I'm sorry, e dot, sorry, this dot state dot new to do, and completed will, of course, default to false. Okay, and so that's it. So now I will just add this to the form. On submit, E goes to this dot add to do, and we'll pass that E in. And now, if I type in a new to do test, hit enter, there we go. We have our new to do. Now, this is still there, so I can just like keep adding to dos, and you can see the number going up, the individual elements going up. Of course, I can check off and delete specific elements inside of here. Now, it does look like we're having a little bit of an issue here in that, well, I'm trying to figure this out, if it's an issue or just there's still like a little bit of a discrepancy on where we're clicking. And that's something that we can keep playing around with. Let's double check. I'm going to check off 2 of these, delete this one. I think I'm just like accidentally deleting and checking things off simultaneously. Okay, no worries. All right, so what I want to do is I also want to update test here. So inside of set state, of course, I don't have to just set one item, right? I can also say new to do, set that back to an empty string. And so now when I type in test and I hit plus, there we go. It added it, and this is now empty, so I can keep adding new ones. Cool. So that was just an idea of working with lists. The list in this example is this array of to-dos, and how we could have all of our CRUD operations here. Now, students normally ask me, okay, well, should you have to-do as their own components? Definitely. Where we could break this down a lot easier is we could have, for instance, we could put this whole UL in a component called to-do list. We could put each LI in its own component called to-do. We could put this form in its own component called to-do form, right? And then all we would have to do is pass in add to-do to the form, pass in a method for updating new to-do, or actually, not really. We would just remove new to-do from the state in here and put it in the form state, right? So we just need a prop for the add to-do. For this, for the form list, we would want to pass the to-dos as a prop. For each individual form element, we would want to pass toggle complete and delete to-do as a prop, as well as the individual to-do itself. So it's just a little bit of prop drilling, passing props in between these different components, but I just wanted to put it all in one component just to illustrate to you how that would work. Okay, and so that will be the URL for this as well. And that means that we are done tonight. So I'm going to send you these slides, and I'm also going to record this. So let me stop sharing.